Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the third webinar in the Insights Outreach series hosted by the DHS Science and Technology Office of Industry Partnerships. In this series, we want to help you navigate S&T's partnership opportunities, understand DHS mission needs, and identify paths to funding to help get the best Homeland Security solutions to market faster. And we invite you to join us the first Tuesday of every month for the webinar series. You can find a list of upcoming webinars on our DHS S&T events page. Today's webinar will focus on S&T's long-range broad agency announcement. You'll hear more about the latest release of our new topics and how to use the LRBAA program to work with S&T. Please note that if you have any questions or comments, be sure to put them in the Q&A chat box. With that, I will introduce Dusty Lang, the DHS S&T LRBAA Program Manager. Dusty, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Connie. Welcome to the webinar. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about the long-range broad agency announcement. So as we refer to it, LRBAA. The LRBAA is a tool used by DHS S&T to be able to engage with industry, to understand and solicit from you ideas on how we can use unique and novel solutions to fulfill our mission needs. The long-range broad agency announcement is a BAA, so it does fall under the FAR Part 35. And does follow those rules. So that means we are seeking a scientific study or experimentation, the advancement of state of art, or increased knowledge. The difference between a solicitation and a broad agency announcement is in a solicitation, you're traditionally provided with the requirements for what you will be doing, given direction about what those activities and tasks will be. Under a broad agency announcement, we're giving you our needs and we're asking you to submit your ideas for how you could fulfill some R&D to help us get to those solutions. And under the LRBAA, we categorize these into three basic types of effort. So we'll have the basic and applied research. So this is very fundamental research that's done, and this is often for the advancement of knowledge in a particular area. We have type 2, which was unique prototypes. So basically what we're looking for is something that can be developed that can demonstrate a capability. It doesn't have to be complete with all of the bells and whistles of an end product, but it has to be able to show that there's this capability that's being able to be accomplished. And then the third type is mature technology improvements and assessments. So often there will be something that exists within industry, or a company will have something that they've developed that is potentially even an end product at that time, but we need an additional capability or feature. And to do that, we have to kind of regress in terms of the technology readiness level, and this then needs to have that technology improvement or capability added, and then that assessment can take place. So next slide. The LRBAA is called broad because the topics are, and long range because the topics are very high level, and we're going to keep this open for 5 years. Now, all of the BAAs, the target BAAs that we have at DHS are often open for 5 years, but they will do calls with for that, and you'll have to have a date by which you have to submit something, and there's a whole structure to it. The long-range BAA is a little bit more flexible and fluid. So during that 5-year period, you can initiate a submission at any point. And we'll talk more about what happens after you initiate in a couple slides here, but you can initiate that at any point during that 5-year period. With one little caveat that I have to put out there is that we do update the topics annually. So a lot of times, because these topics are high level and they're broad, and they are for enduring missions, they may stay out there, or they may get tweaked a little bit. We may end up kind of doing a little bit of a refinement to make sure that they're still in alignment with where we're going and what we've been able to accomplish thus far, but they also could drop off. So while I encourage you to make sure that you're keeping an eye on it and you're able to do your due diligence and not rush to do a submission that is not a good, a complete submission, do be aware that those topics can be pulled at any point, but we do an annual update. The other thing that's nice about this broad agency announcement, the LRBAA, is it's open to a diverse community. So it is domestic, international, academia, small business, large business, FFRDCs, pretty much anybody can apply to be eligible for an award under the LRBAA. And we really think that's a great way for folks to be able to engage with us and make sure they're not getting caught up in any of the requirements for the type of company or organization that they are. Next slide. So as I promised, we're going to be talking about the process a little bit. And there's a lot on this slide, and it sounds like, wow, this is a complicated process. But what we're really doing in designing this process is we're trying to make sure that we don't go full bore into a big, huge lift for industry and for us to be able to determine if there's interest in the ideas that are out there and that are being submitted. So we start with what's called an industry engagement. And this is a simple 3-page abstract with a quad chart and an optional short video if you have a TRL level, technology readiness level of 4 or above, because you really don't have anything to video if you have TRL 3 or below. But the idea is that you're able to give us just kind of a taste of what you're looking to be able to do. And we're able to do a review based on that lighter lift from both sides before we go fully into a full proposal. So we'll be telling you within a goal of 10 days whether or not we have interest and are recommending for you to go forward to the next step, which is the virtual pitch. The nice thing about the virtual pitch is this is going to give you an idea an opportunity to be able to present to us. So you'll have 14 days to develop a 12-point PowerPoint slide, and you'll have 20 minutes uninterrupted to present that presentation. At which point, and then after that, government will take 10 minutes, they'll step aside, they'll get their questions together, and then they'll come back and ask you questions for 15 minutes. Now, it's important to understand, during this process, the government cannot and will not be providing you with guidance of, oh, do this instead. You're coming to us with your ideas and with what you want to do. But we will be asking you questions that are centered around things that may be of concern, maybe things that we need to make sure are good for us in terms of, will this be able to withstand certain operational, environmental challenges and those sorts of things. So it does give you an opportunity to understand where there may be additional areas for you to address if you are recommended to go forward to the next step, which is the written proposal. So as part of the written proposal, you will have 45 days to generate your proposal to submit. And then it will go through a review process, and you'll have to submit a technical report and a cost proposal. And at the end of that, we will be recommending whether or not you would be recommending for funding for award. That's not a guarantee of award. It just means internally we'd be looking forward to trying to go through the procurement process to award. So it's important to note that each one of these steps is a building upon the other, and each one is a chance for us to get to better know what is being proposed, and a chance for us to say, okay, if this is not something that we think is within our area, then we won't be pursuing it. We do have the option at the virtual pitch stage to put a hold onto the process. And that hold is designed because sometimes we're in situations where we have not received funding for the year, and or we're trying to see how other things are lining up. So we may put you on hold while we figure out if this is something that we have the resources, both in terms of how this will fit into a larger program or funding or that sort of thing. We may put you on hold for as much as 180 days. The point of that is to make sure we're not asking you for a full proposal again and doing that heavy lift and then finding out that we aren't going to be able to go forward. So next slide. So the topics on the LRBAA announcements, right now we have 23. They were just refreshed on March 3rd, so they're out there now. They're new, and we're anxious for folks to continue to start their submissions to them. They are categorized under 6 S&T research priority need areas. And we'll be doing a demo a little bit later. And when you go in, you'll be able to see that sometimes there's some crossover. And so make sure you're understanding and paying attention to that demo so you know how to look up topics. But basically, these are the 6 that they'll be categorized under: managing incidences, preventing terrorism, protecting from terrorist attacks, securing aviation, securing borders, and securing cyberspace. So I know that was a lot of information and a very short and quick overview, but I'm very excited to be joined today by 2 of my colleagues who certainly are responsible for making significant contributions to the success of S&T's work towards securing our homeland and providing tools and capabilities to our DHS component colleagues. So if you could please welcome Kathleen and Brandon. So I am going to ask Brandon to go first and introduce herself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dusty. My name is Brandon Valee. I am the program manager for GPS vulnerability in the critical infrastructure, more commonly known as positioning, navigation, and timing. So program managers are in the Office of Mission and Capability Support, and we're responsible for managing the scope, schedule, and budget for approved projects and leading the Matrix S&T team that supports R&D projects for DHS operational components. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, and thanks for that context for where you sit in the organization. And now I'd like to ask Kathleen if she could do an introduction as well.
Hi, my name is Kathleen DeLockery, and I'm in the Technology Centers at DHS S&T. The Technology Centers serve as the subject matter expertise for DHS S&T. We both do fundamental research and serve as technical advisors on the MCS matrix teams that Brandon mentioned.
So it's clear to see why both of you are very important to our mission. So thank you. I'm going to start with a question to you, Brandon. As you said, you're in MCS, and many of the topics that are out there now on the LRBAA have originated from MCS. They were submitted by MCS folks. So I wanted to let folks hear a little bit about what goes into the decision making at MCS in terms of, okay, we're going to put a topic out on the LRBAA. Can you help enlighten folks about the process for that and the thoughts?
Yes, so MCS, Mission and Capability Support, MCS for short, executes efforts to satisfy the requirements that have been identified by our portfolio managers that work with our DHS operational components. So they're working with the operational components to prioritize the requirements. And then, and that's all been based on the strategic program areas for the previous slide, but then it's refined further into our S&T program areas. These are the areas that are of most interest to our operational components at DHS.
Great, thank you. And I think it's interesting to see those areas broken out like that to kind of understand how the topics came to us. And then Kathleen, I know that as you mentioned, your mission is a little bit different, and you're looking at some areas of science from a different perspective and development. So can you talk about there are a couple of topics out there from TCD. Can you talk about the difference in the perspective of where those topics are originated?
Sure. So as I mentioned, tech centers really have 3 main roles across S&T. We provide scientific advisement for the department. We provide technical direction to MCS programs. And the one that's probably most interesting for the LRBAA is that we do fundamental research in the areas listed on this slide. So we have enduring sciences, looking at threats across chem, bio, explosives, and behavioral sciences. We have innovative systems, looking at biometrics, sensors, platforms, communications, interoperability. And then we have advanced computing, looking at data analytics, AI/ML, quantum information systems, modeling and simulation. So we really stretch a broad range of topic areas. The research that we fund is fundamental research that moves the state of the science forward. We aim to provide information for science-informed policy and evidence-based decision-making at DHS. Therefore, the research that we fund does not have to be tied to a requirement of a specific component. However, it still does need to advance the needs and mission of DHS.
Great, and so don't worry, folks. We're gonna talk more about this. We're gonna provide more clarification, but I think this is a great basis for us to start from. So thanks so much. So Brandon, back to you. So we're talking about broad topics. We threw up a whole bunch of program areas. We have a very a large and important mission at DHS, and we have many components that we're serving. And so as someone from industry who may be new to this, and we're looking at the broad topics under the LRBAA, how do they start the process of trying to determine whether this is something that is for them in terms of, hey, here's some topics, should I submit?
Well, I think the first thing an offerer really needs to do is do some research, look and see what is DHS doing already, what are things that can help us? What are things that we have done before? Not just conceptually, but, what part of the mission can it serve? What are you thinking to do that's new and different from what we're doing already? And how can what you offer bring value and really support the DHS mission?
I think those are really, really important things. I think that's kind of a great place to start, is like, how do you know what you're doing is different than what we've already got going on? And research is key. There's too much for us to be able to put into the LRBAA for us to be able to explain that. So it will take some work on the other side. So that's great advice. So I personally, I've got to say, Kathleen, I was very, very happy to see the topic on data analytics from the tech centers. I engage with many businesses in industry, and a lot of folks are really keyed into data analytics right now. And I know this is not your particular area of expertise within the tech centers, but because I understand from industry, it's like they will come up to me and they'll say, well, what do you need in data analytics? It's like, whoa, right. That's a big question. So how do they approach a topic like data analytics?
So I think that there's a few things that can happen. One of the first places, especially when we're talking about fundamental research, which we fund in the tech centers, that we should always look at are our strategic documents to understand where S&T and DHS are trying to drive. What are our goals and objectives in the coming years? Luckily, DHS S&T just put out a new strategy for 2021. And there's some really great information in there around what questions we should ask in deciding whether or not to fund work in emergent needs and opportunity areas. So when a new technology comes about, when we're in a global pandemic and we have to figure out what to do next, how do we decide how to allocate our scarce resources? And just to highlight a few of the questions that, and again, these are readily available on S&T's website in our strategy. The first and most important thing that we always have to ask is, does this support or advance the DHS mission, right? If it doesn't, then DHS is probably not the best funder for the work. We also want to understand how DHS's how DHS's participation will affect the operational impact in this space, right? So what is the public's perception of DHS working in this space? We also need to understand whether or not DHS possesses the authorities or policies necessary to conduct the research that's being proposed. Are we able to start, do and complete and disseminate the research in a timeline that's reasonable to actually be able to aid the community? And the final questions really relate to what other entities are investing in this research space already, and what level of resources are they committing? That really helps us understand what the added benefit is from DHS investment? Is there a DHS unique piece of the mission that we're able to answer with technology? Is the work likely to exist and be done without S&T, DHS S&T investment, right? So I think these are really important questions for people to consider as they're looking into spaces like data analytics, like quantum information systems that are new and evolving, and you're really just trying to figure out, what can we do that's going to aid DHS?
That's fantastic, and as you both mentioned, how is this benefiting DHS? How can DHS use that? I have a feeling that's not the last time we're going to be touching on that point throughout this, because it is an underlying fundamental piece of approaching the LRBAAs. It's very broad, but at the same time, if you're going into a submission and don't know how that's happening, I think that you're really kind of off base from the get-go. But those other questions are really compelling. I like the one of who else is investing in this space. I mean, we have limited funds. Brandon has to make decisions as a program manager where to put her funding, and if we know this is something that is likely to happen within another industry or some other place, then it makes sense for us to look at why we would be funding something that may be only us that has or we're the primary thing, because that happens a lot. I'll talk to folks in industry and they'll say, well, this is something you should be interested in. And it's not that we're not interested in it. It's, it's prioritization, and it's making sure that we're making those strategic decisions. So I think that's great. So those are great questions for starting out and fundamental. We still have to get a little bit more defined in terms of how to get to understanding what we need. So Kathleen was kind enough to be the first star of the LRBAA Today webinar series that I started, and the series is intended to help folks understand, okay, we've got these broad topics and we have these enduring missions, but there are spaces, and we talk about kind of what those spaces are, but we also want to let you know what is going on in this area and what S&T is interested in. And while I have you answer this question, we're getting ready and we're starting our planning for season 2 of LRBAA Today. So we're going to throw up a poll while you're answering this about which topic areas folks may like to see episodes for in season 2 of LRBAA Today. But can you talk about what you what you see as an intent behind LRBAA Today and what folks should be getting from that?
Sure. So I think that with our LRBAA Today, people got a few things. First, they were directed to the strategic documents that matter to us in identifying research needs and priority actions for the department. So my LRBAA Today was on the public safety threat prevention space. So we provided links to the new DHS strategies for countering terrorism and targeted violence, and countering human trafficking, forced labor, and child sexual exploitation. These strategic frameworks can really help potential offerers see what DHS is reaching for, what our long-term goals and objectives are, and what the priority actions are where research is needed in order for DHS to reach those objectives. The other thing that I think was really a benefit to people listening to our LRBAA Today is they got to learn about the, for lack of a better word, methodologies we use, right? How do we approach research in this space? What's the, are we interested in evaluation research? Are we interested in capability development? Are we interested in data development, right? So you get to see what type of work we're looking for in order to reach those larger objectives. So, you get to see our framework, you get to see the methodologies we use. It really kind of pulls back the curtain on how we approach these issues.
I agree, and thank you for helping out with that. Brandon, so obviously we haven't been able to do an LRBAA today on every topic, and bring our value to the world on all of our topics. Can you, from the perspective of if there's not an LRBAA out there, to clear it all up for everybody, what is a way that somebody who's not necessarily been working in the DHS space can understand how to get to resources that are good resources to kind of feed their knowledge and make sure that they understand, as we've been talking about, how is this benefiting DHS? What has already been being done? Those sorts of questions.
Well, I think as you all know, we live in a 24-hour media cycle. So sometimes it's hard to get away from it. I think that what you really want to do is make sure that your resource is credible. You want to validate that the resource is credible, that it is not biased, that it has, are you seeking more information about kind of parameters for what the department will need? Is there information about the operational environment and how it will apply? Social media, even though we do S&T put stuff out there, is probably not your best source. So make sure that they're credible sources and make sure they're current sources as well. I know Kathleen mentioned about authorities. Authorities change. There's a program that I've been working on, and when we started on it 4 years ago, DHS had the authority, and we started some actions, we started some tasks, and now Department of Transportation has the authority for that same program. And so our mission needs at DHS have changed. We're partnering with Department of Transportation, but our focus has changed a little bit. And so it's important for people to make sure they're getting the most current information. And another one thing I want to say as well is, what are the cost impacts to DHS? I'm sure you see on the news that DHS has a lot of money, but we don't have as much as you think we do. No. It's not unlimited for anything that, Kathleen or Dusty or I want to do. And so what are the cost impacts? You may have come up with the greatest thing since sliced bread, but if it's too expensive to implement or we can't get people to adopt it across the country, then will it really make an impact to helping our homeland? And so those are all things to think about as you're preparing your response and looking for information to formulate the best response you can.
I think that's fantastic. I really, I think the authorities comment that you made, I think we all probably experienced that. We experience it all the time, but we as like a noted kind of one recently that I think folks can relate to is the COVID. So, okay, who in government is handling, because this is a health issue, right? But DHS has some of that, but we're not responsible for development of health remedies and those kinds of things. So we do partner with our other federal agencies, but sometimes trying within industry to sort that out is something you have to do and can be kind of can take some time. So thank you very much for those. That's excellent suggestions.
Dusty, I'd add one final thing as well. The civilian agencies approach things from a different perspective than the Department of Defense. And so I think that's really important to remember that, that's just really important to remember. I'll leave it at that.
I know it's in one of the LRBAA today's about countering UAS. It was one of the things that was brought up is that there's different ways that we approach UAS for again, different missions. So great point as well. So at the beginning of this, or near the beginning, I showed the 3-step process. And again, I was like, this is great. This is going to be good. This is a low lift. And you're like, there's 3 steps. So Kathleen, can you kind of help us understand what you see as the benefit of moving to a 3-step process?
Sure. So from my experience, I really appreciate the virtual pitch, which didn't exist in the LRBAA in the old process that we had. So if your project moves past the industry engagement, the first stage that just requires a white paper and a quad chart, then you get to go to the virtual pitch where you get to meet with 3 representatives from DHS S&T and pitch your idea to them and get their questions back. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for industry to actually get that feedback real time from the government. You can see what types of questions we're asking you. You can see what's important to us as you're shaping this research question. I always recommend to people that even if you can't answer the questions that we're asking today in the virtual pitch, if you move to the full proposal, these are things that I think that you should keep in mind. And I think it really helps make the proposals better over time.
I agree. I think paying attention, it's so easy to be caught up in that, oh, I want to talk, I want to get information out, and to forget to listen. So I think that's a great tip for folks. If you get there, be prepared to listen as well. So I'm gonna go. I guess I'm a little out of order on how I'm asking these questions then. But so Brendan, we said again, low lift, get everybody a chance to get in there. So just a 3-page abstract, white paper, and a quad chart. But I mean, this great opportunity we've talked about with the virtual pitch, you got to get there. So in those 3 pages, how do folks make sure that they are approaching this from getting the right information in there and getting the information that you would look at and that Kathleen would look at and say, okay, we want to get this to a virtual pitch.
Right. Well, what I would say, Dusty, is we really want to see what operational component it would support. What is the unique aspect of the proposed research and development? What is, how is this, I mentioned before, how is the solution better than what we're doing today? Another thing, we mentioned pricing. Pricing has to be realistic. We need to have the pricing. Obviously, we need to make sure it's realistic, because sometimes things are too good to be true if they're too inexpensive. And we want to make sure that, it actually can be implemented. I would think that those are all important thoughts that should go into your submission so you can get to the next step.
Yeah, and we do ask for the rough cost right at that very beginning piece. And, I agree with you, being realistic about that. I mean, if you overestimate, something that may not cost quite as much, well, we may look at it and say, oh, this is not something for that, the value that brings, and what we have other planned, and we may not have funding, or all kinds of things can lead us to those. But then if you try to say, oh, well, it's only going to cost this much, but then ultimately it ends up costing more. Well, if we're like, oh, well, that's how much we have, then we're going to be short of being able to deliver a product. And it's ultimately going to be setting us back, and you're not going to be able to either deliver a product or be able to pursue the award anyway. So I know it's tricky, but because we're asking, most of the time we're asking, do something that's never been done before and then tell us how much it's going to cost. But give it real thought, because it is.
Right.
So, and this probably has quite a bit of overlap, but Kathleen, I know in the LRBAA today, we talked about some of the key parts that were missing, and maybe it's not necessarily in the initial industry engagement, but are there any things you wanted to add to things that folks may need to make sure they're paying attention to and covering?
Sure. So I think it's really important to be clear about what your TRL level is, your technology readiness level, and represent that accurately. What I am interested in funding in tech centers and what Brandon is interested in funding in MCS are at different TRL levels. So we need to make sure that your work is getting to the right location. I really want to make sure that people are very clear up front about what their research question is and how they will answer it. And if you're past the point of a research question and you're in the stage of implementation, then this may not be quite the right mechanism for you, or at a minimum, my office is not going to be the mechanism that funds it, right? So making sure that you're really clear up front about those things is going to help us adjudicate your proposal in the best way possible, in the most efficient manner.
And yep, again, being realistic. I mean, coming to us and saying you don't have a TRL 9 is one of the times when this is a good thing. Don't just say that, and because then we won't be able to fund anything. But we're the ones that you come to if you need additional funding to get it further. And we like to be in the spot of having the chance to have that funding and some pursue some things that we need. So it's a great place for us to have overlapping needs. So funding. This is always huge, and I understand why. So we've talked about the we don't have a lot of money. We're not sitting here going, okay, who's next? Who do I write? But we think very strategically, and we look at what we're trying to fund, and we do it from a hey, there's prioritizations across these areas. So we're not just going to tackle one thing and everything else goes aside. So given that there's these topics out there, and so if there's submissions perhaps to two different topics, are those two topics competing for the same funding? How does that work? If you really like mine and you kind of like theirs, or how does that work?
Well, the answer is no. They're not compared directly against each other. And so funding is really allocated at a higher level. And I know I mentioned before about our portfolio managers that work directly with the DHS operational components. So we're actively working with our customers on the prioritization of their needs. And then the funding is at the highest level, and based on what the customer needs and what's the most important at that time, we can reprioritize. So while we're not comparing them against each other, they're all valid. And, if it's most important for our customer, we can usually figure out a way to fund it.
Great. That's great. I know this is something I've addressed in all three of the LRBAA today. So of course, Kathleen, you had an opportunity to talk about why we don't publish funding thresholds in the LRBAA announcement, even per topic. So if you want to do a short recap on kind of what you talked about in the LRBAA today.
Sure. So I think the focus really is be realistic. So ask for the amount that it will take in order to complete the research that you're proposing. We as the government need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. It's imperative that we get the best value. We can only make that best value determination if we have the best information being provided to us. Within my field, we've funded efforts below $100,000 and we funded efforts above $2 million. Our average is probably about $500K per year, but that's going to differ from effort to effort. One of the things I like to recommend, especially in the fundamental research stage where you're really looking in the early TRL levels and longer term projects, is see if you can have discrete pieces of work that we can build into option periods in the contracts, and then therefore we can incrementally fund them over time. That's also really beneficial for research, just because research is not a zero risk environment, right? Sometimes we realize that the direction we're going isn't the best way to go, and this gives us opportunities to course correct over time as well, and it gives us more flexibility in finding funding.
That's right, and it does no good for us to put any partner in a position of, hey, you've got to deliver this, and too bad if it costs you more than you thought it would. It doesn't do us any good, because that's not a great long-term.
No, I was just going to say what Kathleen suggested was excellent. I had a BAA that was awarded several years ago, and they did that, and it makes it a lot easier from a contracting perspective too. Yeah. Our resources are very strained, and so that makes it a lot easier for us to continue to do business with the partner once we have determined we want to move in that direction.
And it's if there's, like you said, if they're discrete too, and I think that's key in making sure there's several discrete pieces that as you're costing them out, because then if there's a piece that's like, oh, this isn't necessarily something that we'd want to fund that part, then we may have the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to take that piece out without having to ditch the whole thing.
Right.
So, great points, great points. And I know, like I said at the beginning, you guys have been, very important in the work that's been done at S&T. I wanted to see if you wanted to chat about quickly tell us about any of your successes with, broad agency announcements in general, or the LRBAA specifically.
Brandon, so if you don't mind, Kathleen, I'd like to go first.
Sure.
We put out a broad agency announcement recently soliciting technologies that can help build resilience against GPS spoofing. And we ended up awarding several task orders under it and successfully transitioned the technologies in 2021. So we're very thankful that the BAA offered us an opportunity to impact the mission and help critical infrastructure owners and operators increase their resiliency against GPS disruptions. So it was a really big deal, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without the program.
So the key here is, if you're listening to this and you're interested in GPS spoofing, don't say, oh, okay, I'm going to submit something too because they've done it. Find out what we did, find out what that effort was for, and find out if you have another piece that may take us further. So yeah, make sure you're checking that out then if that's your area of interest. Don't just submit.
Thank you, Dustin.
Yes. So Kathleen, I know you've had some successes.
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, in 2019, DHS put out a new strategic framework for countering terrorism and targeted violence. And it listed priority actions for research within that document. And one of the priority actions was under Goal 1, understanding the evolving threat of terrorism in the United States. And we've had several proposals come in that are aimed at helping us get to that endpoint of better understanding the evolving threat. And we were able to fund 2 of those efforts last year. So this was a really great example of industry and academia seeing the direction that DHS was going and being able to provide an idea of how to help get us there.
Great. I can't thank you guys enough for participating in this, because I think it took me about 10 minutes to go over the first part, and that was as far as I could have provided information. That was the limit of my knowledge to be able to share with folks. So your participation has made this an invaluable piece of communication that we can provide to folks. So thank you so much. And don't go away yet, because we're going to be doing some question and answers here in a little bit. So if you're out there and you've got some questions, we're going to be collecting them and then hitting them, all of us, back in a minute. But while we're collecting those, Steve is going to give us a tour of what I call LRBAA land. Steve, are you available to start a tour?
Yeah, as long as I can get off my mute button here so I can talk to you guys. So good afternoon, everyone. So what I'd like to kind of start you off with, right, is if we can kind of step back to the beginning of all this, and where do you go to find information about the LRBAA? So the very first place that you would find the announcement at is posted out on beta.sam.gov. So what you can see here is, if you were to go out to beta.sam.gov, you could find the LRBAA announcement that was originally posted back in 2018. And it's had several different updates annually since that point. And as Dusty mentioned earlier, on March 3rd, if I was to kind of show you here, we just posted Amendment 5, which is the recent updates and attachments for the LRBAA. So that would be a great document to go and locate and find and read up on. What are the topics out there? What is the process, the 3 phases? It also does provide a little bit of instructions in regards to what to expect, and the abstract and the quad chart to be able to fill out there. So you would start here at the beta.sam to download the attachment, be able to read it, get familiar with it, and be able to know what we're looking for the LRBAA announcement. Another thing that it will reference in that document is, where do you go to be able to apply and submit information to the topics that are listed there, and also to be able to find more information about more details about the topics that are posted. It'll direct you to our BAA portal homepage, which is here. It's a place to get a little bit more information about what the LRBAA program is, and news and events and awards and things of that nature, who we are, kind of browse you around the actual portal homepage. When you have come here in the many times, this is also kind of a good landing page to come and find where you would be able to log in. And I'll get to that in a minute. But when you first come to this portal homepage, There's an icon for funding opportunities down here, or underneath the funding, you could click on the open funding opportunities. It will provide you an ability to search and see information about all the LRBAA topics that are available. On the left side here, the research area focus, that we've got it broken down by research area, priority, R&D need, and maybe even some keywords. You also have a little bit of a filter option here to display, 5 at a time or more. As mentioned earlier, there's only 23 topics posted, so even expanding a search of 25 would be able to have it all on one page for you. Let me scroll back up here to the search because it put me at the bottom. If I just wanted to see the securing borders research topics, if I just click this button, it is kind of an interactive search, and it goes and it'll change and only show me now the topics for this research area that are posted there and active. And there's a description, there's a link to expand and see what our posted end objective is, the TRL that's sought with, and possibly at conclusion, who we feel like maybe a transition customer or program, and any other background and reference materials would also be posted here. So more detail than what is shared in the announcement. The announcement has basically your description and which research area, but there's more details here off the funding opportunities. And then once you locate an opportunity that you would like to join the process and submit information, it was mentioned earlier, the industry engagement is the first step here in the LRBAA process. There is a link here right off of each topic that says submit industry engagement materials. So you can click on that. If you have never been into the portal before, never created an account, you will need to register an account and have your company information handy and available, because we will create a company account and associate user accounts to that company account. So it's very important that you have your company information along as well. A key thing in that is having your TIN, because if there's been others in your company that have already been in here and you're just creating an account for yourself to the same company, it'll search by the TIN first to be able to make sure that you're both, other employees and yourself are associated with the same company account. Once you're finished with the registration, I've already got a registration. I'm just going to log in here so you can see after clicking the industry engagement materials. I log in. It remembers what solicitation I'm coming from, which topic I'm in, and then it asks me to provide what proposal or what's the title of the proposal that I'm going to want to submit. So here's, I'll just enter a test submission just so that we can go to add this to my worksheet. And then now I am in the portal on my account. I'm landed at my dashboard page. And at this page, it'll provide me any information of, here's my industry engagement that I was just starting, that I just came in for. If I had any previous proposals, they would be underneath my proposals. Now, again, it's what my account has submitted. So whether or not, it's not going to show all company proposals. It's only going to show what I have submitted and any potential contracts that if I've gone through all the different phases. And if I wanted to go further with my industry engagement, it says it's still in progress. I haven't submitted it yet. I would click on this link and it would be able to show me and walk me through the form to fill out to be able to submit my industry engagement materials. With that, I know it was also mentioned that the LRBAA webinar series was also mentioned as season 1 and season 2 upcoming. So I wanted to show that is also out here on the web. Here's a link to right off our Science and Technology LRBAA homepage. There's information about the LRBAA Today webinar series. It has links to the YouTube videos of season 1 and would also be the place to go to watch for information on season 2. And with that, Connie, I believe I'm ready for you.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks, Steve, for walking us through all those sites. I know that those will be helpful to all of you. We should have those addresses up on screen in just a second here, the same ones that Steve was walking through. And then we will also be putting those in the chat in just a second here. And while you are looking at the chat box, we invite you to send us any questions you may have. With that, we'll move on to Q&A. I should note, Dusty, Kathleen, Brandon, we have a lot of questions that have come in through the chat box. So I certainly hope that we get through them today, but we might not. So we do invite you to send us your questions to our S&T Innovation mailbox. We'll be having that email up in just a second here, but we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the Q&A right now. So, all right, Dusty, this first one is for you then. So we have a lot of eligibility questions. Specifically, what types of organizations can apply for the LRBAA? Does that include academia, large businesses, startups, FFRDCs, and, does that include only US-based entities?
No, so it's open internationally. It includes FFRDC. It includes large, small, medium. One of the things I really like about this is not only does it include all those things, but I really love to see a diversity in how we're engaging with industry, both in terms of large business, they bring something to the table, small business, academia, but also any, minority, women-owned. Anytime we're not able to kind of gather ideas from the broadest spectrum of the resources that we have in, to pull from, then we're not getting our best ideas. So I encourage folks from all of those groups to do the research they need to do and get us some ideas to move forward with.
Okay, thanks for that. And then I have a follow-up to that question. So there's a second part to throw your way. Can organizations partner with another entity on a proposal, or a submission? Can organizations also apply to multiple topics?
Yes, they can. So that's a great question. So one, you can apply to multiple topics. You cannot submit the same submission to multiple topics. So, because these are to do different things. If you're submitting if you're putting the same submission out to multiple topics, you aren't doing your research for those topics. And we're not going to have folks just reviewing things that you're just throwing, hey, let's see if somebody's interested. So this is not an opportunity for marketing. This is an opportunity for you to tell us how this applies to that. And of course, they can determine how they would like to partner. But somebody's going to have to be the lead on the submission. So you guys are going to have to figure out amongst yourselves who will be the prime and who will be subcontracting or proposing a subcontractor to an effort.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. And I think that, this next question may be one for all three of you. But what kind of feedback do offerers receive after submissions?
So the feedback you receive from the industry engagement step and the virtual pitch is whether you're recommended to go forward. As Kathleen mentioned in the conversation related to what's the benefit of the 3 steps, those questions it should be viewed as feedback. If you're coming in and you're getting questions on, hey, how are you guys planning on addressing this potential area? So that's feedback. We don't do the traditional feedback unless we take it to the written proposal stage.
Okay. All right. So I do have another follow-up question to that then. Then this kind of is, speaks to that question too. What is the first opportunity you can engage a program manager on the topics with your idea or proposal? Could that even, before your initial submission?
So I'm going to save Kathleen and Brandon from getting a whole bunch of folks trying to desperately find their email addresses and send them hey, are you interested? This process was specifically developed. I get this question a lot. How do I find out if somebody's interested? I'm so glad you asked. Industry engagement. So yeah, if you want to find out if there's interest at DHS S&T for your idea, 3-page abstract. If you want to do 2.5, do 2.5. But yeah, that's how you find out if there's interest. And from there, we'll recommend to go forward. So, I mean, obviously, if you're at a conference, you're at an event, there's another, way that's already taking place. I'm not suggesting that you don't engage with Kathleen and Brandon. Speaking with them, certainly a valuable use of your time. But this is the way to find out if there's an interest within DHS S&T. And I'm not going to answer any more questions.
Well, can I just add something
Yes.
to that? I think the really important thing here is that it's also the formal way, right? Like, yes, please, if you see me at a conference, come talk to me. I love chatting with people during the breaks. But I can't promise you anything during those breaks, right? This is, if you make it all the way through the LRBAA, then you end with a contract. And there are certain rules that we have to follow at DHS during contract negotiations around who talks and who has to be present. And this really helps us make sure that we're following the rules that are set out. And just kind of adding on to that, it also means, even though maybe I was the one that you communicated with to set up the virtual pitch, and so you have all of my contact information and you're comfortable reaching out to me, at the point of the, getting feedback from the written proposal, it has to come through Dusty's office. It doesn't come directly from me because, again, we're in kind of a contract.
We're making sure we're compliant with the FAR, and we're treating everybody with the same ability to access us and provide their submissions.
Yeah, we want it to be fair.
Yes. Absolutely. Yep. We do.
Okay, and I think that we have time for just a couple more questions. Dusty, you had mentioned the quad chart just a second ago, and we did have a question of, where can someone find instructions or an example of a quad chart?
Yep. So there are instructions both in the announcement and if you go to our portal, there's information on what you should provide in that quad chart. And not everybody pays as much attention to that as they should. Like we were talking about, make sure you're providing a rough price, those kinds of things. This is an easy way for you. We're trying to help you make sure you include these elements. So. Great question.
Okay, and hopefully this is one last great question, and we'll leave it here for today. What happens, or what is the timeline if my written proposal is accepted at stage 3?
Ooh, I hope Brandon's going to take this one.
Well, I would say one of the things that I do like about working with the LRBAA process is I do think it makes it easier. I think it makes our procurement process easier. I think, otherwise, unless you were going to somebody who was already on the GSA schedule, sometimes it can be hard to get to businesses that don't traditionally do business with the government and aren't on strategic sourcing vehicles already or aren't under a special classification of company. And so this does give us a way to get to you. We still have to go through the formal procurement process, but it can be closer to 3 to 6 months. And again, that's not a promise, but closer to 3 to 6 months as opposed to 12 to 18 months. So I definitely like this program for that reason.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We're coming to a close at the end of the hour here. That's all the time that we have for today. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today in the audience, especially also Dusty, Kathleen, and Brandon, who all provided some great insight and resources for you all. Dusty, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do. So again, we're going to be coming out with the second season of LRBAA today. We weren't able to leave season 1 with a cliffhanger, so we still hope to join us for season 2. But don't worry, you can binge watch season 1 by going to the website that Steve pointed you to. So I love binge watching. So hopefully this will be something that you guys can binge watch. reach out to our office. The email address is there if you weren't able to get to your question and or you have additional questions in the future. So thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Kathleen and Brandon and Connie.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you guys so much. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I know there were a lot of questions and that we were not able to get to them today, but again, we have a team standing by. We'll put the email in the chat box here in just a second. Of course, we have our own Insights Outreach webinar series going on. And we invite you to join us next month as we discuss S&T's Cooperative Research and Development Agreements. Now, during this webinar, you will hear from DHS S&T's CRADA partners and program managers about the CRADA process. Additionally, who may participate in the collaborations and other successful projects. So we hope to see you next month, and thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.